Welcome to Breaking the Silence, the podcast where we open up the conversations that matter the most but are often left unspoken. This is a safe space for real talk, honest stories, and deep exploration around sexuality, mental health, relationships, and the social issues that shape our lives. Welcome to Breaking the Silence. A very big warm welcome to you, my lovelies. Thank you very much for tuning in to Breaking the Silence that is brought to you by the Department of Basic Education. I'm your host, Dineo Ranaga, Osi Omotona, the one and only oldest sister of the nation. I've been given a task. I've been assigned. My name has been called to be a vessel, to be a bridge, and to be a place of safe space for yourselves, for ourselves, to engage in conversations. And I'm not alone today. I'm joined by Dr. Nwabisa Jamashai, who is Director and Researcher at Gender and Health Research Unit of the South African Medical Research Council. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Thank you for having us.
You are most welcome. You're definitely most welcome. I want to get straight into it. Today we're talking about a very sensitive topic, sexual violence. One that I personally feel from a legal perspective, and I'm noticing this trend globally, when I'm looking at headlines and articles and cases that have gone to trial and so forth of sexual violence, that sexual violence perpetrators, they really get away with a lot. It's almost like the hand of the law is very lenient towards them. It breaks my heart and it makes me very scared as a parent. I'd like to start our conversation talking about the prevalence of sexual violence in our schools, because we know that sexual violence in schools is a widespread issue. Our children, and I hear myself saying this a lot lately, our kids are not safe. They are definitely not safe, Doc. So what factors are contributing to this culture of violence in our schools?
So thank you for having us.
You're most welcome.
I think as a start, I'll just remind us that schools are a microcosm of the wider community and wider society that we're coming from.
Yes.
So what we see in schools is what is probably happening in the community and in children's families and in their relationships. So one key thing that I would like to start with is the fact that some of the factors that drive the violence, especially intimate partner violence, which could be related to sexual violence, is the gender inequalities that we see in our society. Gender inequalities that operate in a way that privileges men and boys at the expense of women, and which shows up in terms of the oppression, the disempowerment of women and girls. And what we see there is that the society that we live in, whether it is in the school setting, back in the community, back in the family, the role of men and boys is elevated, and their power is also, it shows up in a way where it's supported and is expected, and girls and women are meant to obey and do what is expected.
This is true.
In such a way that whatever then boys and men do, it is seen as what should be. There's nothing wrong with it. They're exercising their power as they should, and girls and women should just, go along with whatever that is expected. At the same time, those norms and attitudes are also accompanied by behaviors which, when boys grow up, they grow up understanding that I have power over women or girls, and so if I want to have sex with anyone, or if I want to try certain things out sexually, because we are talking about young people who are still growing, so as young people enter into teenage years or adolescence, they start to have questions, their bodies are changing, start to have sexual desires, and there are various types of information that they're exposed to that tell them how these things are done, but now they do not necessarily have the preparation of how to go about exploring sexuality. And when they go through that, there are other things that happen, whether they've seen them at home or things that are said about how to approach women, that you can have any girl that you want. For you to be seen as a boy who's who's successful among other boys, then you should be the kind of guy where if you say something, the girls are interested, they should love you, they should want to be with you. And we see it happening as well with teachers in the schools, where there is no filter between this is a child, and so that relationship should be prohibited. And it is by law and policy in the school prohibited. But the same notions of I can do whatever I want with young women because I can. These young women love me, and so I can go ahead and have sexual relations with them, or try and see if they would agree if I tried something. And on top of that, we also have the poverty that is driving a lot of the issues that we are facing regarding violence. We have poor mental health issues, substance abuse that also make it even worse. And we also have young people who may be growing in contexts where they are neglected and they have experienced some form of violence. And especially if they have witnessed the violence, it also counts amongst these factors. Witnessing it at home happening, whether between a mother or a mother figure and a man in the home, as well as themselves being violated or physically abused, emotionally abused. And the neglect brings in the issue of parents. The absence of parents, their lack of attentiveness, their lack of consistency in monitoring and checking what's happening with children can also leave some behaviors and even attitudes or habits unchecked. And so you see them happening at school. And sometimes the emotional impact of all of these challenges that young people are experiencing in their home, in their community, they show up in the school, and because they've not been provided with the support that they need to deal with the trauma that they may be witnessing or they have experienced in their own bodies as well. So there's quite a lot, but just to highlight those for now.
There's a lot. There's absolutely a lot. And I'd like to tap into how we define sexual harassment. There must be ways in which we can encourage our children, or learners rather, that they point out and they speak up. But what do they speak up about if they don't even know how to define that it is a sexual harassment? Can you break down the various forms of sexual harassment that learners may experience?
Well, it's really expressions of sexual desire. They can come in any form, but the recipient doesn't want it, has not asked for it, perhaps doesn't even understand what is going on, but it is the decision that the perpetrator makes to approach a person who doesn't want, doesn't desire, and also doesn't reciprocate that behavior. So when you're talking about reciprocation, we may think that, we may even be confused that if a young person looks like she is, giggling and laughing when a teacher approaches them in a sexual way, either with his words, so it can be words, it can be physical, it can be a touch, or it can be certain jokes that are said in their presence. So when they giggle, sometimes people misinterpret that for consent, and it probably most likely isn't consent. It's actually embarrassment. It's shock that, oh wow, like an adult speaking to me like this. Now how do I respond? And so we have a whole set of these gestures, whistling, catcalling it's called. We have comments on young people's bodies and how they are dressed, and how that, those shots suit you very well on sports day. I wish to see you looking like that, all the time. Your skirt is shorter today. Why you changed? It used to suit you. Even the opposite, because it's not even about showing flesh. It's just a person feeling that they have access to your body and the ability or even the right to talk about your body, and they shouldn't. So boys in the school, like peers as well as teachers, when that is happening, it actually tells you that those are forms of sexual harassment because it's how the person also feels about them. And sometimes because it's young people, it doesn't really become clear what's going on. And so it takes them some time to understand it. And we also need to be careful with adolescents in that when we're talking about adolescents in particular, they're crossing the threshold of feeling, of wanting to be desirable. They're wanting the attention from other people. And so doing such things to young people who aren't yet set on what they like, what their values are, what they want, what they can accept, we can tend to misinterpret it. For children, of course, silence is the response that we're going to get because they don't even have the concept of what's going on in their minds. They're not even coming towards, they see adults who are loving towards each other. That's the only concept they have. But how it starts, how you start these intimate relationships, or how what sexuality really looks like, they don't have a concept of that. So they don't even know how to handle it.
You know what my concern is? And it's an alarming, growing concern, actually, that we often take sexual harassment and we position it as something that happens to girls, leaving boys behind.
Yeah.
And we tend to forget that they too also get sexually harassed. Yeah. We tend to make it as if it is girls only that get harassed, boys don't. And it's only boys that harass and girls don't.
Yeah.
What of the boy child that's getting harassed? How do we secure or ensure, rather, that they are confident enough and feel safe and have safe spaces that they can go and disclose that, hey, this is happening? Because there's a lot of shaming of, it's almost like normalized that, you're a girl, you're supposed to get sexually harassed. And it's a shame thing to the boy.
Well, boys are certainly abused, and the reason, let me just start here. The reason that we focus a lot around girls is because of the extent to which we see the violence happening
so that is in majority.
Girls. It's in the majority. And the other thing is that the social positioning of girls. Girls aren't in a position to ever even see themselves or even to be treated like they have a power, even to say no. Right? So with boys, it's the vulnerability of the child that I was talking about. The vulnerability of a person who's still budding and trying to understand all these things. If they're teenagers, it's still, they haven't really come to terms with what even their sexuality may be, just like girls may not necessarily know what preferences they may have. And so with dealing with children, so I think what we should take is that when we're talking about sexual violence in schools, we're talking about sexual violence to children. Anyone under 19 is a child, even if they may be, in their teenage years. So the issue about shame has to do with this notion again of male power, that because you're a boy, you must grow into the strong man who, is in charge of his life and who should be appearing as the strong character who is now gonna go out and look, be interested in girls and so on. So sometimes when we do not, and this happens to men too, because this whole thing about male power isn't healthy for men when it is around issues that encourage violent behavior or violent abusive attitudes anyway. So it isn't healthy for older men as well. But then there's a certain vulnerability sometimes that is seen in the child that is in this boy, that then whoever the perpetrator is, because we have also seen studies that show that women have abused young boys growing up, right? So these studies are also showing us that it can be about the attitude that you must grow into this. You should be sexually active by now. So at the age of like 14, 15, you should be sexually active.
And
I'm going to show you, I'm going to teach you how it's done, and so on. And so that has to do with the conceptualization and the construction of what it means to be a man, to be a boy. That when you're a boy, you must be interested in girls, you must have as many girlfriends as possible, you must gain the experience that you're going to need when you're an adult male, and so on. And to answer the question on what should we do to break this shame, all sexual violence, women, men, even young men who may be sexually active, young men who may be gay or transgender, we need to, or even bisexual, we need to give every victim of sexual violence the space, the knowledge, as well as the support when they need to receive services, whether it is in terms of information, whether it is the mental health and the counseling support that they need, or even just how we speak about some of these things. We need to be sensitive to all victims of sexual violence.
I would like to zoom in on victim blaming. Because the learners in this episode, they cite that a dangerous narrative that places the blame on the victim, often focusing on either what they were wearing or what they were doing.
Yeah.
Why is victim blaming so harmful? I mean, I think between the both of us, it would be common sense why it's harmful. But sometimes common sense is not that common.
Yeah.
And we just need plain, simple answers in black and white to remind us that it's not that complex. It truly is quite simple, and this is how simple it is. And how can we shift our language to hold perpetrators accountable instead? Because perpetrators, once they've done the act, it goes on for them.
Yeah.
Nobody focuses on them. But once I come and say I've been sexually harassed and I've been sexually violated or sexually assaulted, then it's a zooming in on all the possible things that I could have done wrong to qualify that I deserve this. And that's I think that's a very deep level of shaming that I can only imagine that it rewires the victim's perspective on life. And they will most probably have to work super hard to unwire that or continue in this life with this changed perspective. And what a sad life. What a sad life.
You're right. The last part of what you said, but just to respond to the question, why are we saying it's harmful? When we're blaming someone for something that happens to them, which should never have happened in the first place, we're telling them that what happened is their fault, or that actually it didn't happen. So you're imagining things, you like attention, especially with young children, you like attention. And if now we bring it to the personality of this child that is bringing this case, we will also then say things like, but we know you and your stories, or how you get, and things like that. And so that's part of saying, well, you made this up in your head. They didn't mean to do that. We're excusing the perpetrator's behavior. We are also tolerating it, and we're invalidating the person, what actually happened, this event, the trauma of what has happened to them. And also we are also perpetuating the stigma that says, well, why is this thing happening? What did you do? So you were dressed in that particular way.
You shouldn't have worn that. You shouldn't have gone there. Why weren't you home earlier?
Yes, and we've been telling you about these kinds of things and you don't listen. So we can say things to young people that say, well, young people who are caught up in this, let's say it's the love of music and going out and whatever. So of course that's what happens to such young people. You invited this in your life. And so all of that at the same time can be blended in with these norms, the way we think about what it means to be a girl, what it means to be a boy, and in these times living in a particular setting, and saying that the ways in which we think and do things as a society, how we've positioned young girls, young boys, is that those, our attitudes are the right ones. And so we turn them around, and we tend, when we applying it in a stigmatizing way to this young person, we are saying to them that they have just played either into the role, right? And in a way where they could have avoided it. So it's their fault. They knew that, they could be at risk, but it's their fault that they put themselves in that position. Now, it affects their mental health. That's why it's harmful, because it's their mental health, and it undermines their ability to cope first with what has happened, but also with their ability to prevent it from ever happening again, because there may be a risk or danger cues that they could have missed in that first episode of what has happened to them. And now, because they are already blaming themselves, they are ashamed of themselves, or even thinking they put themselves in those positions, they are unable now to be in tune with what they could do next. We know of young people who harbor quite a lot of depression and post-traumatic stress disorder, and also even something called complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which now is kind of the worst version of it, where they're unable to cope ever in their lives. We've heard in the news of young people who have been exposed to violence in a school setting by a particular teacher, and how this one young person ended up committing suicide because he just was never able to cope from what happened when he was 10 years old. And he had been suspected he had been sexually abused from that age. And now, before the age of 21, 10 years later, they never had the ability to cope well with what happened, and to be able to say, I can mold a way of being and a life for myself that is positive, knowing that I have been through this, knowing, yes, it will not change what had happened to me, but now I can find other resources within myself and within my support structure to help me through and to create a life for myself, which I have a right to live. Yeah.
It seems to me like parents and educators, we are dropping the ball, because it is our responsibility to create a safe space for our learners, our children. What are the steps that both parties can take to ensure a safe space for our children to be able to talk, and not only talk, but that we can prevent sexual violence?
Wow. So I think let's just start with the school environment and the educators. So South Africa is actually in a good position. We have the policies. So policies provide, indicate to you, to the sector what is important. And so schools don't support violence, don't support corporal punishment either. And we support positive discipline. And all of those principles should be embedded in the way the school operates. So all educators need to have access to positive discipline approaches. And we know and are aware that a lot of educators feel that with positive discipline, it's a long haul kind of approach, because you first have, there's quite a lot you need to do. You must praise the child, acknowledge the child, set rules, and then follow up on them. And now if you have either 35 or 60 children in one classroom, yes, that's challenging, but the more you master how to do this in a way that says, you, the child in this class, and me as the educator, we have a contract of how we behave, and we established that at the beginning of the year, and this is how we're going to operate throughout. But I think also there needs to be time given to educators to implement these positive discipline approaches. And I know that perhaps it is difficult with the administrative work and the teaching work that they need to do, but I think if we make that as a lifestyle, if we make it a lifestyle, it's not only when I enter the school or when I'm marking, when I'm teaching, that I adopt this stance. It's a stance that educators, when they're going into the profession, they need to adopt. That I'm gonna build a culture of nonviolence. I'm gonna build a culture of molding and building young people, even when they are cheeky and they don't allow me to do that, right?
Yeah.
And even when the environment and the teaching environment is very difficult, but I'm going to stay on this stance to bring positive energy into this classroom, to highlight for these young people what are the challenges that your generation of young people are facing. We are not talking about sexual violence in the education sector in a way that starts with what are the foundational learnings that we should have. We should talk openly about sexuality. Then we will be able to talk openly about when then you are violated. So these things, we can tend to be reactionary about them. And I know we can't remove ourselves. Like I said, when we started, we are in schools, we are a microcosm of the broader community. Now I'm coming to parents to demonstrate this. Parents sometimes find it challenging to communicate with their children.
This is true.
Just generally. I'm feeling tired today, baby. You know, I really did not perform well at school. I mean, at work. I did not perform well, and I am not happy with myself. And my boss was on my case. And talking about your failures and talking about your successes, your uncertainty, your fear, your lack of finances, and the plan you're making to make up and come up with ways for us to do better as this household. So when we are unable to communicate with our children, yes, at a level and at age appropriate, in age-appropriate ways about different things with our children, then we are unable to then break this barrier so that they can then start learning from us that, well, sometimes life is not easy, but this is how we must approach it when it's not. And also building the trust between the child and the parent. So because of our own a lack of skills as parents. And this is part of the positive discipline approach, where we also have to set certain boundaries. So my child must know my standards.
Yes.
And must know my expectations. Not when they've done wrong. We must know from the beginning that this is what is expected. There are also things that we also don't have control over. The environment sometimes around us, there may be violence in our communities. We may be also in a violent relationship and finding it difficult to leave that. A violent or abusive, emotionally abusive relationship, financially abusive relationship. But if we learn to confront these things and communicate with our children, we are building an environment where children will be able to open up when something happens to them, but also to understand that actually this is not the way things should be, and this is what to do when things are not going well. So schools is the policies, but then the parenting support is the additional thing that we should be having. Because we know that parenting is difficult.
Yes.
Many parents have not gone to school or learned or got a degree on how to parent. It's a lifelong journey of near misses and some, on goals sometimes. But the joy of it comes from doing these things and learning and starting, early enough, and also getting the resources that we should have. And I want to come quickly to the programming that has some evidence that when we do these things well, it helps. We know we have evidence that positive discipline interventions work to improve how teachers handle issues in the classroom. We know that parenting interventions work when we are bringing the parent and the adolescent in particular together in joint sessions and sometimes in separate sessions where they learn on their own. What are these things that I must learn at my age or the age of my child? How do I communicate better with my child? How do I set up an environment where I can discipline my child in a non-violent way and get back from my child a behavior and an understanding that, yes, of course, we're not going to get along all the time, but I still love you and I care for you, and you can trust me with your vulnerabilities. And when when the world outside our home isn't going well, these are the ways that you can handle them outside, but we come back and we regroup when we get home, and we find ways to deal with the challenges together.
100%.
And that's something that we need these programs to be made available to all parents, to be made available to all schools, and the challenge is also the funding for these kinds of programs. But we know that there are certain aspects of the department that are already supporting this. We wouldn't have this evidence if this Department of Basic Education didn't allow us to go into schools and to work with the learners and their parents on how to make to make a prevention of violence work in the parent-child relationship and within the school. So if we allow individuals around these children to, I guess, do what they want, then we ourselves are putting the children at risk. And when we don't become clear, when we worry more about a partner who supports us financially versus the long-term mental health of this child. When we
because
worry,
those are the dynamics, yeah?
Yes. When we worry more about what people think about me, if I'm divorced now for a third time and I can't keep a man as a parent, whether I'm male or female, or gender diverse, it doesn't matter. So if I can keep, a partner, what do people think about me? What does it say about me? Not at the expense of the child.
It sounds like we are prioritizing the wrong things.
Yeah, the child. But of course, we are confronted by quite a lot because we also need some of these relationships. We need this financial support. But it's about what we choose to put value more towards
100%
than anything else, because we may risk having a partner who abuses our child, letting our sibling abuse the child, but what happens in the long term? And we know that people who have been abused have these mental health effects that can worsen over time. And sometimes we also see in our research people who have been abused, whether it is neglect or sexual physical abuse, they also tend to be perpetrators as adults. So there's another, like we're trying, when we more clear and we really intentional about ensuring safety of children, we are preventing intergenerational cycling of violence when we're doing that. And so that's what our goal should be.
Everything that you're saying, it highlights the very important fact that the school environment plays a significant role in either perpetuating or preventing sexual violence. So now my thought goes to, and my heart goes towards those children that do report, that do speak, but are not heard.
Yeah.
Because thereafter there's nothing. So now they feel let down. So how can schools create a culture that prioritizes safety? And let's highlight the improvements that can be made to reporting systems to ensure that learners feel heard. Because if I am reporting something, in order for me to feel heard, what cements that I've been heard is an action that follows, an action that is in support of my cry, an action that shows that truly we are trying to seek this out, investigate and get to the bottom of it, and that a justice is something that I am worthy of. But then oftentimes we find that children speak, children report, those that are confident and those that are brave enough, not always confident, but just brave enough to do so. They then feel defeated, and I can imagine how heavy that must feel, because after now I've shared with the system or the school, my educators, my parents, nothing is done. How can we improve? Where can we improve? It's a lot, eh?
Yeah, it's actually, I think, understanding what drives the violence to start with. And so we've spoken about quite a lot of things, the impact of this violence. We've spoken about the drivers, like our attitudes towards people, how we, what we think a boy child, girl child, gender diverse child should be. But I think there's something else that I just, and we also I also mentioned that we need to be prizing these interventions, because these interventions also have, they also have an educational part of it that includes how to support victims of violence. But I want to add something new, at least in my thinking now, about treating, or rather, let's say, adopting a first responder approach that everyone in the school ecosystem, from a cleaner to the principal to the SGB of the school, that all of us are first responders, that we don't have one designated individual to deal with these kinds of issues. And usually in schools, it would be the life skills educators in all these grades. I think when we are approaching violence in general, because it's about violence, our attitude to violence, abuse of other people, ill-treating other people, insulting other people, snide remarks, bullying, even by educators and children, peers as well, that if we have that first responder approach and say that everybody who's an adult in this institution is tasked with the responsibility to look out, but also to be the person, when they pick it up, they know what to do. They know where to go. They know where to refer. I just want to say also that the way in which educators themselves carry themselves, behave, and the things they say to children. In a project that we're doing on working with, trying to understand violence with young people, when they talk about school setting, they're talking about sometimes educators insulting them because they are favoring those ones that are performing well over those that are not. And so things like, there's only one child in this classroom. Everybody else is like decoration, and those kinds of comments actually tell children that if I'm not a good performer, I can't then come to you. I can't, you don't favor me as my educator. You don't care about anything to do with me except that if I give you 100%, performance in my test or exam, and all you care about are, ticking the boxes about how well you are doing in educating me, but you don't care about anything else. And so the overall well-being of the child should be the concern of the educator.
However, what if it is the educator that is the perpetrator?
The problem there is the school. When you adopt that stance, you're able to weed out those that are demonstrating that is not happening. Remember, if you have first responders, everybody adopting the attitude that says we are a non-violent school, so it doesn't matter if Nwabisa is the perpetrator. You will report Nwabisa. You will follow the referral system for dealing with violence. So it is not, and it's even better because then you hold the teacher accountable when they have been shown to be abusive.
How are they held accountable?
You report them. You follow.
But then what happens? Okay, fine. Yeah. So a teacher has been reported to be a perpetrator, and then what are the steps that follow? Because half the time we see perpetrators back into society. We see schools employing people that actually have a tendency of sexual violence and predator sort of traits, and they will, and predators, they go as far as, predators are very weird because they will go as far as obtain an education in a particular field just so that they can access the pool of pray that they want. And then when these people are reported, what are the steps that follow? Because our learners need to hear this. And the reason why I'm drilling on this one is because...
We can stay on it, actually.
Yeah,
there's quite a lot to talk about.
100%. And thank you for giving me grace to expand on it and drill on it. The reason why I'm sitting on it and drilling on it and asking to find out what happens after they are reported, what are the next steps that will be taken, because our learners, they need to feel safe. And without this knowledge, they are going to stay feeling unsafe. And for as long as they are feeling unsafe, they are not speaking. And the whole purpose of the exercise is to get them to speak.
I imagine, I don't work at the Department of Education, but I imagine that when a case of sexual violence comes up, there are two processes. There's an internal disciplinary process that holds the educator accountable. And that process should be supported by a clear sexual harassment policy and violence. It probably would be now a gender-based violence process or policy. And that should demonstrate seriousness that the department is anti-violence, that we are not going to tolerate any violent behavior by an educator in our system. And also, even after a case is closed, we have, even during the case being discussed and processed, that we collect enough evidence and we're clear what constitutes these forms of violence that we find unacceptable. If it had been sexual violence, then it fits in within the definition. If it's sexual harassment, it fits in with this definition. And we hold people accountable. We don't bring children back, predators back into an education system, because we know that they will find another way to abuse another child. We understand the psychology, even like what you've just said, that they will always find the best jobs, the most sought after teachers, and they will move from this school to another one. And they're probably likable, etc., because they have conditioned themselves, positioned themselves so that they can get access into these environments where they can find victims. We've heard of teachers coming back into the education system. That happens because our attitudes towards, the violence, our understanding of these definitions, even the unions that represent them, we're not all of the same mind about what we want to achieve with non-violence, what we want to achieve to prevent the violence. When we're of the same mind, I imagine that we will be more effective. I think the other challenge is that protecting each other inside the school as co-educators, when we first responders, that stops. We stop tolerating that. I know so-and-so likes them young. Sometimes we hear these things.
And
he likes them young.
We hear it as a joke.
Or she likes them young.
And we hear it as a joke, and it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be.
Our principal, we know that he, after school, or like he keeps one of them. And these are things I grew up, knowing they were happening, right? So when we don't tolerate that,
and it's normalized,
and once we have identified the problem, we don't give up until the system yields, because we have a national strategic plan on gender-based violence and femicide that takes into account these kinds of things. And I think our government has committed itself to ensuring that all departments understand, and even the Department of Basic Education has aligned itself with policies. Their policies aligned now with ensuring that we don't tolerate violence, we don't excuse it, we don't let it happen when we know. There's a registry, for example, and there's a debate about whether we should register sexual offenders and so on. There shouldn't be a debate. It should happen.
It should happen. Is it not that the registry is going to be publicized?
There's contestation about when and how right now, but there should not be any debate. If we don't want to tolerate violence, we don't want to excuse it, we should be very clear, we should be very firm that it should be known who are these perpetrators, and they shouldn't be in the education system.
So there's no contestation on the fact that it will be publicized. There's only contestation on when and how.
I don't know exactly, but what I've heard is the when and how.
Or the when and
Yeah,
how.
I've heard the when and how.
Our children need to hear this. Our children definitely need this sort of information so much, and they need to know. And I'm glad that you're sharing this, and I'm glad that you're opening up and availing yourself for us to have these conversations. How do we empower our children through self-protection? Because while we focus on, changing the system, it's also very important to empower the learners to protect themselves. And, there must be strategies that are practical.
Yeah.
Can you share some of these that learners can assert their boundaries, stay safe in potentially harmful situations? And the potentially harmful situations, it breaks my heart. They are school and home and in between.
It's very difficult for me to give responsibility to children about violence, which most likely is perpetrated by adults.
I like that, actually, yeah.
So I will talk of adolescents who are learning who they are and who they may want to become. And I think when we empower them with knowledge, but we also empower them with certain information that helps them to be aware of what danger cues look like. When they understand and they reconcile in their minds that when I'm stopped from going to parties at a particular time in a particular place without an adult supervising us, that I may be in danger. So being aware of those kinds of things, that's the kind of thing I would say, okay, we can give them that kind of information. Being firm about not caring as much about fitting in when it looks like fitting in is not supported by adults. The way I fit in with other young people isn't supported by my parents. If my parents feel, or caregiver in the home don't know where I am, and I have to hide it from them, then there's something wrong there. Because if something wrong happens, something bad happens, will I be able or feel that I can talk to them and tell them what's happened? So it's in them being aware, what can and can I do? Can't I do? What can I do that brings me closer to being safe? To know what makes me feel safe and what doesn't make me feel safe as a young person. So where they are able to start asking themselves those questions, answering for themselves, what are their safe spaces? And also knowing, okay, so if I'm not safe in this situation, what then can I do? So it's in the thinking about these things ahead of time. But I also want to say parents and caregivers and educators also need to know what to do. I think we don't prepare ourselves. We don't ask ourselves these questions. We want to avoid. And I think the extent of violence we're seeing in our country doesn't allow us the luxury of avoiding anymore. Because not only are we as adults exposed to this violence, our children are exposed to it. And now we're struggling with ways of stopping it. So it's us also as adults around children needing to be more aware and having the resources as well to help support when it's needed.
Doc, you know what I'm thinking? I'm thinking that there are children, obviously, that are being sexually violated by their biological parents, right? That brings me to the painful statistic that we are a broken home nation. Our statistics do show that many of our households are stepfather-led households or single mother-led households. Biological mom and dad are no longer nuclear, so we've got less nuclear family structures in our country. Now, it becomes more of a higher risk when there is a non-biological person under the roof. And I'm thinking of now, sister, I also don't like, I love what she said, that you don't like, not to quote you verbatim, but along the lines of handing the protection of children to children. It's our responsibility, because when we do that, we're saying it's their business. It's not our problem.
Yeah.
But the risk is then higher when there's a non-biological, would I be correct in saying that the risk is higher when there's a non-biological person in the household?
I don't want to support you in that.
No problem. Let's engage. Let's engage. Please talk to me about your view on that, because we're broadening our knowledge base here. Yeah.
Look, children are not safe where there is an adult who is not, their thinking isn't around loving and protecting and building trust with the child.
And then this could be biological or non-biological. It does not matter.
Can be anybody. Can be a helper. It can be the mother themselves. And there are reasons behind this. So certain people may not have dealt with their own trauma as children. We know that people have been exposed to quite a lot of ill treatment. It could have been at school, could have been at work, or maybe in a previous relationship. It could have been, growing up. It could be the history of our country or anything. But if people don't have the capacity to commit to, supporting children, we may not even know until something happens. So it can be anyone in the environment around a child. I really don't want to get us too married to the idea of broken homes in that sense. Families are different. And families can also be made up of people who really are not as related, and they can be as caring and as loving towards one another. They can be supportive towards one another. That is partly why I was saying that we should commit that when we have a relationship with a child, it should be about us leading in that relationship with love, with care, with protection, because we know the environment around us. And that if we commit to nonviolent attitudes, we can pick it up. However, there is something that does happen when we do not transition into blending families in an open way, where we talk about what are these expectations in this new relationship that we are having. I may bring a friend into my house, I may bring a new partner into my house, but if we have not agreed what are these rules of engagement in this relationship, that we don't beat children in this house, that we develop trust in this way with our children. This is how we're going to behave. This is, if we're going to drink, we drink in ways that are going to ensure safety of the children. We don't leave and no one knows where we are and the children are stranded. They don't have food, they don't, the lights are out, etc. And we leave children in danger. We do these things in this and that way. So when we have clear rules of engagement with the adults around us and the children in our lives, then we're setting ourselves up for clarity, so that when I then break your expectations, then we know that we should, part ways, and that I did not make it because I did not, work with you in our relationship as a friend or a partner in a way that, that pleases you and keeps, the children around us safe. So I think sometimes we compromise ourselves because we feel in greater need for these relationships than a greater need to look after the kids.
You did mention that. Support for children, support systems for survivors, for learners who have already experienced sexual violence. What do these post-violence care systems look like for them? What should post-violence care look like?
I will just reel on one. Certainly, post-violence, there should be mental health care.
100%, I agree.
The standard mental health care that is provided by our health services and maybe even our psychosocial services is usually the standard 3 sessions, counseling sessions. We should go beyond that.
I think so too.
We should go beyond that because we know the long-term effects of sexual violence. We know it can even lead to people committing suicide at 10 years later. We know that it can lead to people being perpetrators and maybe even victims again of violence. And so the way we structure our mental health services, our psychosocial services should be for the long haul, because we're wanting to ensure that there's proper healing. And the proper healing that happens is when we say and enable the individual to say, okay, now I've gotten to a point after a year of counseling where I understand it wasn't my fault. But I know that something could happen in my life that brings me back to this thing. And again, another trigger. How do I now deal with these triggers around me? How do I prevent myself from spiraling out of control because I had a memory because of some event? And now I can't function at work. I can't do well in my friendships. And I'm always on the alert, I'm paranoid, and I'm having panic attacks again, and things like that. How do we support people so that they can develop them emotional and mental resources that they can lead their lives in a more productive way where they do not adopt maladaptive behaviors? Maladaptive behaviors could be drinking quite a lot, using substances, drugs, and it could be also, adopting violent attitudes and behaviors themselves, etc., etc. So how do
self-destructive behaviors?
Yeah, and so how do we make sure that when we providing these mental health services, we allow people to come back, and we create a system that not only allows, encourages people, follows people up, so that we ensure that we are healthier, and that whoever has been victimized is going to have, a more positive outlook and actual life after the violence.
This has been such a rich conversation. Very, very rich conversation. I'm so thankful for your time. I'm thankful for your input, and I'm thankful for sharing pockets of different perspective that stretch the mind, and that shifts one's thinking to say, well, I thought it this way, but actually this way. I appreciate that a lot. In closing, Doc, what is your call to action? What do you think can be done as we work towards creating, safer schools? What immediate steps can be taken by the entire community? We're talking educators, parents, teachers, learners, because there's a silence that needs to be broken. And what can we do to take meaningful action against sexual violence in schools, practically? In my mind, it boils down to self-control and self-regulation of those that have a tendency to do this. But unfortunately, we are failed. And we can't control anything outside of ourselves. But as a community, if we come together, there can be ideas we can share.
It's actually, I've been struggling with this question because it's not one thing, but I will say that anyone entering into an education setting, they shouldn't go in there if they're not committed to caring for the children whose lives they're meant to shape. These are educators in particular, are people who we remember as adults for having taught us that idea, that way of working, given us that knowledge. And so we need to enter into this profession with the understanding that we are meant to mold lives. So it's our responsibility, even when it is tough, even when the people being educated don't want to be educated. So we should not relent just because the going is getting tough, but rather we should be emboldened to do even better.
100%.
And so in our understanding, we should keep learning about the threats to these very people that educators are meant to support. From anyone in the top level administration of this department to the teachers and the cleaners who are in the school. We should all be committing to a mindset, to a mindset that says we will learn as much as we can so that we can ensure the safety of these children as much as possible. And even when these children are resisting the education, even when their parents are resisting the support we're trying to give them. We don't stop. We continue. So that's my call to action.
And I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Your call to action has been heard. Thank you very much. Hey, I think this was, I'm sure wherever you are watching, you feel just as full as I feel. There are many areas in this conversation and this dialogue that we've just had that restore my sense of safety on behalf of my children as a parent. And I think we can all just do better. But also, I want to leave you with this. Sexual violence does not only happen to females. Sexual violence happens to females and males. Perpetrators of sexual violence are not only male. Perpetrators of sexual violence are male and female. My heart goes out to anyone whose human right to safety has been violated in this regard. My heart goes out to the families who have had to deal with children that have been sexually violated at home, at school, as well as in social spaces. I think it's one of the worst ills that could possibly happen to any one child, any one human being. And I do hope that you have enough energy within you to continue to talk, to continue to name and shame those that bring violence your way of this nature. Thank you so much for tuning in to Breaking the Silence, and I would like to thank you, Dr. Nwabisa Jamashai, who is Director and Researcher at Gender and Health Research Unit at the South African Medical Research Council. I am Dineo Ranaka. I love you. I'm out. Bye.